Excellency, U.S. Ambassador, and all of our friends and colleagues who are on this call, and of course the Mandela Washington Fellows. Congratulations to you all as being selected as fellows, and also for the very great work that you're doing. And we must commend the U.S. government also for keeping the dream of YALI alive. But listening to the leaders of the 3 tracks and the great work that they lead is evidence that we're listening today to Africa's most exciting story, at least certainly Nigeria's most exciting story. The story of a present and a future that could be steered by our nation's incredibly talented and optimistic young men and women. The innovation, the creativity and thoughtfulness that I've seen in the different projects that you have developed is evidence of your belief and confidence in the future of this country and indeed in the future of the continent. And I took time to look at all of the projects that have been done, a very large number of them, the different profiles. I read through all the profiles, and I'm really quite taken, I'm really quite overwhelmed by just the sheer range and the depth of what has been done. And this, in my view, is the best news possible. The news of great hope and enthusiasm about the future. Hope is the fuel of progress and prosperity. And I think that every generation has a responsibility to itself and the future to believe enough in its own abilities and God-given resources to build societies where people can live their lives in peace, in joy, and in prosperity. But within any generation, only a few wholeheartedly take on that challenge, the challenge of building society. Most believe that the task is for someone else, and that such endeavors cannot even pay the bills anyway. So let me say to you that you may not know this, but those of you who are so active in these various not-for-profit causes belong to a small club of those ready to pay the price to see their countries and communities grow. So you are individually and collectively nation builders. And that is what public service is about. You are young public servants, even if you are not in government employment. But I want to say something which may, of course, turn out to be controversial. And that is that you need to go the extra length. If you're not already involved, get involved in politics. While a lot can be achieved in government, while a lot can be achieved in civil society, and I'll talk about that in a moment, government still holds the ace in terms of capacity and resources to bring the social goods to the largest numbers. Besides, being deciders instead of pressure groups at the table in policy formulation are hugely different positions. The consummation of our great ideas to transform our societies ultimately will depend on, quote, those politicians, as we sometimes derisively describe them. I was once where you were. I was part of several civil society groups growing up. I joined the first civil society group that I was a part of when I was 24. I was teaching at the time, I started teaching at the time at the University of Lagos. I also co-founded the anti-corruption group Integrity and then Convention on Business Integrity, which is still alive and well today, and they function out of Abuja and Lagos. At the time, we published a weekly bulletin called Scrutiny to expose official corruption. And that was during the Abacha era, and there was quite a bit of trouble then, even just trying to get this kind of information across. And we got into all sorts of trouble and all sorts of skirmishes with law enforcement. I was chair of the Legal Research and Development Center, where we worked on civil rights issues and legal defense for the poor. We did a couple of legal defense initiatives. We got funding from donors and all of that, and tried to do the best we could. But if I count the number of those that were able to reach, maybe in the years, maybe about 100 odd or so. So we achieved some good. But compared to the scale of the problem, it was really a little. But in 1999 came politics, and I was appointed Attorney General of Lagos. With that platform, we took on the corruption in the Lagos judiciary, and we set a model. We reviewed the issues of corruption in the Lagos judiciary and how to address it, from remuneration to discipline and all of that. And we're able to put in place, an anti-corruption framework that has lasted several years. And I'll just give you a quick example of what happened in Lagos at the time. Now, we did a survey of legal practitioners who were who practiced in the courts in Lagos. And we asked the question about integrity of Lagos judicial officers at the time. 89% of them said that the judiciary was notoriously corrupt. And those are notoriously corrupt, 89%. That was 1999. So we knew that we had our work cut out for us. We then decided what were the real issues. Lagos judges at the time were paid 46,000 naira a month. Not enough, of course, to even pay school fees or anything. So we had to look at remuneration, and we took decisive steps on remuneration. The one fear that many judges have is that they would not have a home to live when they leave office, because you're not allowed to practice law once you leave office as a judge. So Lagos State government, as a matter of policy, decided that we will provide a home for judges, and that will be their home, and they can take it away with them when they leave office. A big, house, 4-bedroom house, boys' quarters, and all of that, in the place of their choice, Ikoyi, Lekki, or Ikeja, depending on which they chose. And then we took to the question of discipline. If a report is made, we process it immediately to the NJC. As a consequence of the steps that we took, 22 magistrates lost their jobs. They were sacked for corruption. That was the first time in the history of the state that anyone had ever been sacked for corruption, anyone at all, or had ever even been reprimanded. 3 judges lost their jobs also. But then, when we did that survey again with the World Bank in 2007, asking the same questions about Lagos judges in the high courts of Lagos, 0% said that judges were corrupt, 0. Now, it's not that the judges suddenly had a change of heart, but we put in place a system that guaranteed not just remuneration, but also discipline. But the reason why I make this point is that states, after what we did in Lagos, copied that very example, the same example. So many states improved remuneration and improved a wide variety of things. But the point that I'm making is that it took public office to be able to get the scale of change that was required to make a difference. It took public office. Without public office, I would have remained in a pressure group activist. I would have done some nice things. I would have been involved. As a matter of fact, I was also a fellow, as a Rotaract fellow. I would have done all of that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't have been able to make the change or the changes that my country required. The second thing we did in Lagos at the time was that we established the Citizens' Rights Department. For the first time in the history of our country, a department was established in the Ministry of Justice for the rights of citizens. And that was important because the Ministry of Justice is not just a ministry of law and order. It's a ministry for justice for the people. And that ministry, that department had what was called the Office of the Public Defender, a concept which we borrowed from some US states, and were able to do the defense, legal defense, government-provided funding for thousands of Lagosians, thousands, literally thousands. But the more interesting part of that story is that almost every state in Nigeria adopted the Citizens' Rights Department, adopted the Office of the Public Defender. Now, go back to when I was an activist working in the legal research and development organization, where we're trying to do some work on legal defense. Yes, we did some. We did a few. But we certainly couldn't achieve the scale that we're able to achieve in public service. So simply the point I'm making is that African nations, and especially our nation, cannot afford to have its best minds and our most committed social activists remain only in the civil space. You know, we simply can't afford it. You guys have to get involved. You've got to get involved in politics. You've got to be in a position to make the difference on the scale that is required. You've got to be able to do that. And of course, there are many who will not be involved in politics, but those that are inclined should. And I think it's absolutely important. Of course, there will be many, many challenges even in the way of getting heard in politics. But I want to say to you that that for me is, should be an objective that you should set for yourselves, to get involved at whatever level of politics, so that you can make the kind of difference in the scale that you're required to make the difference. More youth representation in programs that affect young people. And I agree with that entirely. I agree that we could actually have more youth representation in programs that affect young people. What we've tried to do, for example, with respect to formulating policy in the tech and creativity sector, we actually set up a tech and creativity advisory group where we have quite a few young people who are in the tech space and in the entertainment space, working with us on formulating policy. Some of that was very effective because we're able to get policy around fintech companies, and the central bank was able to put together a policy, especially for fintech companies and licensing of fintech companies. A lot of the contributions from the tech and creativity sector policy group was instrumental in formulating those policies. But I think that certainly going forward, that is a format that should work, where we have more young people involved in the process of policy making. Then there's the questions around reform of the IELTS policy. I think that is something that I would ask a few questions. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with this at all, but I'll send that to the Ministry of Education as well as the Ministry of Youth and Sports, just to see where they're at in this particular issue. I agree entirely that first of all, as an English-speaking country, we should be beneficiaries of some concessions as opposed to being forced every 2 years to take the same test, especially if you had passed it once before. So I think this is something that we should really work on, and this is a point that we can follow up. We'll certainly ask the Minister of Education and Youth and Sports as to what exactly is going on about this, if anything. Then Veronica wanted to know about building capacity for existing youth which can network. I think I've already addressed that. Yes, I think I've already addressed that about working with my office. So then I'll come to Ayo, who wanted to know about the balance between the judiciary, executive, and legislature. The weaknesses in these institutions. Well, let me say first of all that you're absolutely right. The notion that democracy works best where you have the checks and balances created between the executive, judiciary, and legislature is really the ideal. Now, there's no question at all. And every democracy that is based on this system is in a continuing effort and a continuing evolution to ensure that this balance is maintained. But what you tend to find is that institutions are probably just as good as individuals who man them. And to a very large extent, and it's unfortunate, but to a very large extent, the quality of individuals who occupy these positions often affects how the institutions function. But because what you have are very well laid down rules. Our Constitution despite what some may say, is one of the best crafted that you would find, especially in terms of the balance between the executive, judiciary, and the legislature. But constitutions, again, are just as good as those who operate them. But I think that what we will find as things evolve is that things will just get better, in my view. I think that we are in a position where, we're evolving, and we see many of the problems, but time was when the National Assembly would not even reprimand the executive. But today you find that, you find situations where the National Assembly says, go and reverse this or do that, or, So we're evolving. I have great hope that this system will work, and in any event, it's the best possible system. But we must strengthen those institutions. And one of the ways to strengthen the institutions is to strengthen the quality of people who occupy these institutions. So there must be more aspiration on the part of those who are reform-minded, who are interested to come into the system and make the system work better. But in every country of the world where you see this system, these systems in place, it's continuing evolution, and they're refining and refining and refining. I'm sure you see very frequently, look at what's happening even in the US, which is, the model that we have. You'll find that almost invariably clashes between the executive and the legislature, for example, where the executive may say, the legislature says, we want this evidence. The executive says it's privilege. We have executive privilege. We're not going to let you have it. Obviously that weakens the performance of the legislature and its oversight responsibility. But these are evolutionary changes, and I'm sure that as time goes on, we'll get much, much better. Agom wanted to know about the Snakebite Center. Incidentally, I was in Kaltungo in 2019, early 2019, and I met with the Emir, and he had raised some of the issues with the Snakebite Center. I will follow this up with the Minister of Education, Minister of Health, because he apparently had something that was being done, but I'm not entirely certain how far he had gone with that, but I'll certainly follow that up. And I hope, Agom, you'll be able to keep in touch on this issue, because certainly I know that there is something that the Ministry of Health, I believe, was trying to work out with the state government. And just to say also that, okay, maybe I'll come to that when we get to Enibokun's question. How can we improve access to medicines and to vaccinations and all of that? Well, I think in the first place, we need to do a lot more campaigns. We need to do a lot more convincing of people. Unfortunately, conspiracy theories and all sorts of false news, fake news about vaccines and all of that have gone out there and really poisoned the minds of people about vaccinations. And I think that we need to do a lot more campaigning. I have not seen sufficient social media campaigning, and it's not just the federal government. So we have a federal government task force, presidential task force. But as you can imagine, that is it can't work for the entire country. Which is why, and to the point I was about to make, medical services, healthcare is a state function, I think this is a very important point, and we mustn't miss the point at all. And it to some extent also speaks to what Amarachi had asked about, because it's very easy to just say, federal government, why don't you do something about underserved areas? But constitutionally, the role of the state governments and the local governments is primary health care. As a matter of fact, health care is a function of state governments. But and we must engage the state governments in these things. We must engage them. They have budgets for health care. The federal government sets up a few tertiary institutions. So we have some teaching hospitals and all of that. Primary health care is not really the business of the federal government. It's the business of the state governments. And unfortunately, state governments themselves are prepared to keep quiet when they find that people are, attacking the federal government for medical care issues and all that. Even out of school children, primary school and secondary school is a state government function. But every time people talk about out of school children, they say, why isn't the federal government doing something about 10.5 million out of school children? Whereas this is really a state function. It is completely a state function. It's the states. And if you look at the individual, states, if we want to address these issues concretely, if we take on each state, and we have a list of the state, we have the numbers of out of school children in every state, but it's a state function. I chair the National Economic Council. At the National Economic Council level, we have a dashboard where we look at all the different states and what they're doing. So we do name and shame. You are not doing enough in this area, especially human capacity development, in the area of healthcare and education. We say, no, you're not doing enough here in education. These are the number of out of school children in your state. This is the state of your healthcare services, etc. But it still comes down to the states taking action. The federal government cannot force a state. There's no way you can force them to do stuff. We can only prevail on them by moral suasion and all of that. So I think that even in our advocacy and in some of what we're doing, we must recognize that a lot of the pressure has to be mounted on the states because this is their constitutional function. They have budgets for it, they have funding for it. So I think that it's important, that is understood. And I believe that this is the same with respect to vaccinations, spreading the message of the importance of being vaccinated. I think we have to also take this to the last mile, have the states and local governments participate in this, even as we also do some work in the social media, trying to get people to be vaccinated. Kenny wanted to know about teaching civic issues, integrity, and at the schools. They have been able to do so, and I agree with you entirely. I think this is very important. This is very, very important indeed. I'm also I'm a convinced advocate of the teaching of civics, and making it relevant to people, to young people in schools, because many people, the way that they hear first about integrity and those kinds of issues, aside from being taught at home where that is done, is usually in churches and mosques and places where it is made to seem like a religious obligation. And I think that we need to go beyond that, so that young people understand that integrity pays, that integrity makes sense from, even from the point of view of doing business, that that trust is the currency of doing business. If you can be trusted, people will give you more to do, people will patronize your business, and you are more likely, especially where integrity is a problem, you are more likely to be preferred for any roles if you are able to demonstrate integrity. I think it's important, even in the teaching of integrity, in the teaching of excellence and diligence, to tie it to success. And where it is tied to success, I think it just has more resonance with young people. I agree with you that this is something that we ought to do, and it's a message that we ought to take not just the federal government, but also the states, the state schools. What can we do to enhance the tech ecosystem? I think is the second question that Kenny asked. I agree entirely that we can do much more, but I also want you to look at what is being done already, just so that you know how far we've gone, especially in terms of not just providing facilities, and there are several facilities that are being provided, including the latest that we're working on with the AFDB, the $500 million facility for not just providing cheap credit for people in the tech space, but also de-risking commercial funding, commercial bank funding for people in the tech space. And then also looking at policy that may enhance it. I just talked about the fintech policy that we have, where there are a lot more licensing of fintech companies is going on now. If you recall, I mean, barely 5 years ago, you could not be a fintech company operating properly in Nigeria because fintechs do a lot of work that looks like banking. And obviously, many fintech companies can't get banking licenses. So with some of what is being done in the CBN, obviously there's a lot more progress being made. But you must also recognize that we must do more in terms of informing the public sector about what is current and what is useful policy. You know, the world itself is evolving in terms of developing policy around tech. The whole world is evolving, and I'm sure you're familiar with some of the questions around taxation. You know, because these are, you know, multinational, you know, cross continents. People don't. I mean, Facebook, for example, it doesn't have an office here, but has 75 million. I'm not so sure how many. Maybe now over 100 million subscribers, who they make money from, but they don't pay us any taxes. And that happens, you know, a wide variety of tech companies. So there are questions going on all over the place. OECD countries, for example, are putting in place taxation regulations for tech companies and all that. The point I'm making is that we're at a point where policy is evolving, and I think we should all be involved in that debate. This is new for everyone, new for even the most developed countries of the world. So I think that we should continue to look for ways of bringing forward our own ideas and inputs into policy discussions. I also want to say that one of the great difficulties that any policymaker will have with technology is just the fact that you can operate from anywhere. So you're always going to find a situation where people will, you know, operate from different places, either because the policy is better or because taxation is better and all of that. So this is an evolving space, and I think that as we go along, we will be able to do even more. But your input would always be very important and relevant. Then Shadrach, on drug abuse, I agree entirely. One of the best things that happened in the past couple of months, of course, is the NDLEA, the new NDLEA boss, former governor Marawa, who is doing incredible work there. And the reason why he's so effective is because he also headed the research into drug abuse in the country and did incredible work across the country, studying these issues very closely. But again, these are issues that we must engage the states in. We just must engage the states. These are very micro issues. We must ensure that the states and local governments are actively involved in this fight as well.